In this session, we are going to discuss about the history of DevOps. We'll discuss how the word was first thought of and what it actually comprises of. Is it a technology? Is it a tool? Is it a process? What all things are there? So, actually, what happened is in 2009, a group of people got together in a place called Ghent in Belgium. And in Ghent, what they did was they called up some developer guys, some operations guys, and they wanted to brainstorm ideas about how to make developers and operations work together better. At that point of time, it was about, let's say, processes, about various tools, whatever was available already to make such kind of a thing happen between developers and operations. Mostly few automation tools were looked into, few process related discussions were looked into. This was not organized by any big company. This was organized by few people working in top companies, and they just decided to get together and have their friends called in and have a discussion of sorts. Now, it generated quite an interest, and quite a few influential people got together into that particular conference. And after the conference, people started tweeting about it. The name was given as DevOps Days because developers were called in, operations people were called in, and the objective was to bring up a synergy between developers and operations. The people who organized the conference, they decided to shorten the names and take dev from the developer part, ops as operations, and because the conference was held for 2 days, they called it days. So accordingly, DevOps Days. And when the whole conference finishes, people started tweeting about it, and they started using hashtag DevOps Days. Now, Twitter being how it is limited in terms of number of letters that you can use in a tweet, people started also making it short and doing it as hash DevOps. So that's where the word started becoming very, very popular, and it kind of, as you know today, got viral, and everywhere around the world people were trying to do DevOps Days conferences, and till date there are DevOps Days conferences which is held across all places, all continents, all countries. Now, the original DevOps Days conference, if we look into the agenda of it, we will get a sense of what was the thought process of the people who started off giving this DevOps Days name and discussed few things. So here is the agenda. They discussed about non-functional requirements. Do user stories really help? This was an agile process related discussion. Rachel Davis is who presented this. Then they discussed about Nagios, a monitoring tool, and using Cucumber with it, Flapjack with it, and this was presented by Lindsay Homewood, so monitoring was a part of it. Building agile infrastructures with Puppet was taken by Theo Prairie, and Puppet obviously is a coding language in the DevOps world. Introducing Kanban in operations was taken by Matthias Karin. Now, Kanban is a tool that developers use to decide what work is to be done, how much work has been already done, who is supposed to do it, all those things they kind of display in a dashboard using a Kanban format. Now, that's called the Kanban board. And how do you bring that kind of a concept into operations to make operations also work in a similar kind of a model? That was the discussion which happened. Continuous integration, pipelines and deployment. This is typical release automation part of the job, where you have to take the source code, integrate it with other people's source code, put it through a pipeline which does deployment, testing, and finally releases it to production. So around that, Chris Red took a session, and there was also a session about OpenQRM, a very well-known open source cloud management platform, which was presented as a solution that not only sysadmins can work on, but also developers can directly use the self-service portal features of that OpenQRM to launch a VM whenever they need to test out their code, or they can use a Puppet combined with OpenQRM to get a pre-configured virtual machine with whatever they want on top of it. session was taken by Matthias Reichenberg, and these were all the sessions that were taken. Now you can see a mix of processes and tools. Now DevOps, therefore, is something which is about not only tools, it is about a best practice, it is about certain processes, and more or less it is about doing the things that you are otherwise doing as a sysadmin or a developer in a different approach. Like we can see here is the OpenQRM use case talked about something that sysadmins used to do. Now how can we apply this to a developer use case? In case of the non-functional requirements, it's an agile process which is more of related with the developers. Then you have the agile infrastructure with Puppet, which is then related with the infrastructure or operations people. So these are all the mixes that you can see in that original DevOps Days conference, and gives you a rough idea about what all things were being discussed at that point of time. And if anybody gives you a definition of DevOps, that what DevOps actually is, then that definition would have been created afterwards, but these are the original discussions that happened in the first DevOps conference. That should give you a good idea about what DevOps really meant back then. Now, as you can see in the conference, Puppet was discussed, and Puppet is a tool that does automation by using codes. But you have to realize that the conference was being held in 2009, and Puppet was already a dominant tool in the market. It got launched in 2005. And then you have Chef, which is a primary competitor to Puppet, which also got launched in 2007. So DevOps did not start in the 2009 conference. DevOps, technology-wise, did existed even earlier than that. It is only that you started giving it a name and started thinking of it as a new domain of technology from maybe after the 2009 conference. To be very true, the Puppet and Chef fall under a domain called infrastructure management as code. And infrastructure management as code as a domain has existed even before that Puppet and Chef came in. As back as 1993, there was a tool called CF Engine, which in very ways are very similar to the way Puppet and Chef is. So CF Engine is a tool that existed from 1993. So DevOps tools and technologies, the approaches have existed for far long. It may be that when CF Engine was in its initial days, was not thought of as a DevOps tool, was not thought of as infrastructure management as code. They tried to solve problems across multiple Linux operating systems. How do we create a single language that can control all the Linux operating systems? Those kind of thought processes were back then, but gradually people found use cases into the DevOps flow, which is the place where developers people and operations people have to work together to make a software release work properly. So that's where these tools got redefined or got a new use case. Another thing which happened and which propelled the growth of DevOps is that AWS came out in the market with this whole concept of cloud computing in 2006. And in that cloud computing concept, they talked about API, application programming interface, for controlling infrastructure. So before that, not many people would have thought that infrastructure components like a storage network or a compute can be controlled by something like an application programming interface, and you can actually do a programming around those infrastructure. AWS followed it up in 2011 by using AWS CloudFormation templates, which is basically a programming language to control the infrastructure operations on top of AWS. So that kind of opened up this whole domain about infrastructure management as code on top of cloud computing. And AWS's advent also propelled this idea that we should be having a programming language that can use the APIs, the application programming interfaces that Amazon launches, which is where this Puppet, Chef, Ansible, all of these tools got a new place where the automation can be done. And all these things, that's automations that needed to be done, these automations needed to be executed in a certain order. Like for example, you can launch a virtual machine on AWS using CloudFormation. Now CloudFormation simply launches a virtual machine which has a bare minimum operating system. Then you need to do the configuration of it. You need to install middleware like a Tomcat server or a database like MySQL on top of it. Once you're done with the installation of the platform, that is the Tomcat and the database, then you would do a deployment of the application on top of it, which would be done maybe by a different tool. So CloudFormation launches the VM, Chef creates the middleware and the database, Capistrano, as an example, can deploy the application on top of it. Now, once the application is up and running, then you start the testing of it. That time you would call in something like a Selenium. Now, these are only 4 steps and 4 tools. There can be similarly other 10 steps and other 10 tools which you need to do together. So there is always a need, when you have so many tools doing separate pieces of automation in the overall application release flow, to call them together from a central point. And for that you need a tool that can integrate with all of these things. Now, back then there are many tools which are coming out every now and then. The typical proprietary vendors who would have the continuous integration and continuous delivery tools, they did not have integration with every new tool that is every day coming out in the market. For that to work, that every new tool coming out in the market would be immediately integrated with a common continuous integration, continuous delivery tool, you needed something which is in nature of open source, so that it's not the responsibility of the CI/CD tool maker to do these integrations, but rather the people who are developing these small automation tools, they can themselves extend the centralized CI/CD tool to be part of this kind of workflow, so that they can create their own plugins and push it into one particular tool that can work as a workflow manager. In 2011, Jenkins came out in the market as open source tool, and advent of Jenkins meant now you have an open source tool with very much a plugin architecture, where every new tool that is coming out in the market can create a plugin and get integrated into. Now, Jenkins fundamentally had all the workflow related constructs, had a great plugin management system. So that started happening. All the people who were developing small automation tools, they created their tools, they created their plugins for Jenkins, and Jenkins kind of became the de facto tool which has integration with almost all the automation tools, almost all the DevOps tools in the market. So that kind of made the process very much easier to adopt DevOps. In 2013, a revolution happened in terms of the launch of Docker. It kind of changed the whole game. Even today, we are talking about whether Puppet and Chef kind of automations are at all required if you have Docker. So Docker is a tool that uses containerization, and it does it in a way, and it has propagated some ideas like immutable infrastructure based deployment, which completely changes the model in which we used to do even DevOps, which is itself a new domain. The way we do it, before 2013 and after 2013, there's a whole change because of Docker. So advent of Docker kind of revolutionized even this new market, and with that I think overall adoption started happening all across the industry, and you could see people adopting the original tools of DevOps like Puppet, Chef, Jenkins, as well as going into containerization kind of Docker kind of market as well. So with that, from 2013 onwards, a lot of adoption started happening. 2014-15, a lot of success stories started to come out, and across industry there was a huge demand for implementing DevOps, and that resulted into a big growth of the DevOps market, with lots and tools available in the market. Now, it's humanly possibly impossible to actually learn all these tools. This set of tools that you can see in the screen right now, this is a more or less a depiction of a periodic table of sorts of all the DevOps tools that are out there in the market. It's not a complete list, but definitely it captures some of the leading tools of the market. And there are so many tools that Zapier Labs, which is a company of release automation market, they came out with this whole idea of depicting them into a periodic table of sorts, and it actually became very popular. A lot of people refer to this periodic table to see, for a particular purpose, which all are the tools available in the market. Like for example, let's say I'm looking for a tool in deployment. So deployment's color is blue. Sorry, deployment's color is green. And on the right hand side, you can see all these tools which are mentioned under the green color. Auto, Deployment Pack Manager, Smart Frog, Zulu, Capistrano. These are tools that are being mentioned as DevOps tools for deployment. The blue ones refer to the CI. So Jenkins, Bamboo, Travis CI, these are coming under the blue one. So a lot of people use this periodic table to quickly check up what are the leading tools in the market for a particular type of DevOps. As I said again, it's not probably possible for a person to learn all the tools. So you have to really pick your bets that these are the leading tools of the market, which if I learn or which if I adapt, I'll get the most benefit. In terms of finding a job, you have to figure out which are the tools on which the most of the demand is there in the jobs and learn those.